Patch 13.1b is upon us with some nerfs, some buffs, and some other changes too. The first nerf goes to Gangplank, who's getting less AD per level, and the bonus crit strike damage on his barrels is being turned down. Next we have Donga, whose turrets are getting significantly less health, especially in the early game, and his W is losing 10 flat damage, but gains an additional 10% AP scaling. Next we have Caedrel, whose E's cooldown will go down by 1 second per level, rather than 2. Next we have Kindred, who's losing a flat 10 damage on her Q. Following this we have Lucian, who's losing a good chunk of base mana and mana regen. However, they are getting additional mana per level and mana regen per level, with this nerf being targeted towards the amount of abilities he can use early game. Next we have Maokai, who's losing 20 flat damage on his Q, and his E is losing a bit of health and AP scaling. Following this we have Nami, who's losing 10 flat damage on her Q, but getting an additional 5% AP scaling. In addition, she's losing 5 damage per hit on her E. Next we have Ryze, who is losing 4 base magic resist, and his passive is being reduced to give him less mana per AP. Following this we have Udyr, who's losing AD scaling on his Q and flat damage on his R as it's leveled. Next we have even more nerfs for Yuumi, who's literally at a 47% win rate, and I love it. She's losing 75 attack range, 6 flat AD, 50 base health, and 2 base health regen. Her passive will now give her 25 attack range for that attack only, and the shield strength is being reduced by a good amount. In addition, the scaling on her W has been reduced, and the AP scaling on her E's movement speed buff has been completely removed. For buffs, we have Lilia, who's getting additional AP scaling on her passive, her Q, and her E, along with her E getting a shorter cooldown as it's leveled. Next, we have Orianna, whose passive will now scale every 3 levels. In addition, her Q will now deal 70% additional damage to all targets hit after the first. Her W will cost less mana as it's leveled, and her ultimate will now deal an amazing amount more flat damage and gets increased AP scaling. And the final buff goes to Zoe, whose E will now reduce the magic resist of enemies who are under the sleep effect. Next, we have a quality of life improvement to all these ADCs who are getting some sort of mana buff to make their early game mana usage easier. We also have a massive buff to heal reduction across the board. Oblivion Orb is losing 5 flat AP but getting 40% grievous wounds. Putrefier is losing 20 AP and 5 ability haste, however will now increase heals and shields and gives 40% grievous wounds. Morello loses 100 health but gains 10 magic penetration and 40% grievous wounds. Executioners and Chainsword loses 5 AD but gains 40% grievous wounds. Mortal Reminder loses its attack speed and movement speed but gains armor pen and 40% grievous wounds. Bramble Vest now deals more reflective damage and applies 40% grievous wounds. And Thormail's reflective damage has increased armor scaling and applies 40% grievous wounds. For item changes, Eclipse loses its Omnivamp but gains ability haste, and its shield now has a shorter cooldown on melee and ranged champions. Goredrinker's mythic passive will now give health and a small amount of ability haste. Rav Hydra's Omnivamp has now changed to lifesteal, which will trigger on the cleave and it gets 5 extra ability haste. Moore's Omnivamp is now 12% lifesteal, gives 10 extra AD but it loses its ability haste. Death's Dance gains armor and AD but loses ability haste, and the healing per takedown is greatly decreased. Black Cleaver gains 5 AD and 50 health. Lord Doms gains 5 AD. Infedge and Quick Blades will now come online at 40% crit strike chance. Bloodthirster's Cheaper has reduced lifesteal but now gives a much larger shield. Hawk has a 30-second cooldown, increased range damage on hit, and reduced siphon magic damage. Demonic's maximum health burn has been turned down again for melee champions but increased for ranged. And Essence Reaver costs 100 more but you get 10 additional AD. Also, Chemdrake is now better.